whom you're supporting for the leadership. Will he be meeting the President?
I've no idea.
You don't know, should he be? Would you like to see him meet him?
No, I'm not his diary secretary, and, I'm sure if it's appropriate, it will happen. But look, they're two very, very separate issues. We've got a serious challenge on our hands to find the right Prime Minister to lead this country forward at a pretty dark moment. And, the Trump visit is something entirely different.
Right. Will it help his endorsement?
Well, I don't know whether it'll help or it'll go against it. I think, he clearly has a relationship with Boris Johnson, and I think relationships are really important. I don't think you can do, as the Labour Party has done, and just sort of sulk off and pretend the whole thing's not happening. He's obviously got a relationship with Donald Trump, and that's a good start.
One of the problems people might have is knowing which Boris Johnson is actually running for the leadership of the Conservative Party. Is it the former Liberal Mayor of London or a new ally of Donald Trump?
So I can absolutely assure you that it's the first one. Otherwise, people like me wouldn't be involved. Absolutely right.
Well, how do you know that?
Started, all this One Nation stuff. He started this in 2000, 2004 when he was first elected. He won a Labour city in London. He talked about the Life Chances agenda. That is the Boris Johnson who's going for the premiership, and that is the Boris Johnson.
Right, but I've spoken.
The article about Muslim women looking like letterboxes after that, didn't he, Johnny?
We're not going to go through everything that has happened and
but that is
defend.
After.
Everybody has a history.
The
question is the moment we are facing now requires someone who can go out and win, who can govern from the centre ground, who can bring people to the party.
Let me come back to this issue of the centre ground, because I've spoken this morning to one Boris Johnson supporter like yourself who's actually worried that he's not going to be tough enough when it comes to no deal regarding Brexit. Are you sure you know what his position is?
Boris has a position that is very, very clear. No responsible person would take no deal off the table, and no responsible person would like to leave without a deal, OK? So we have to find a balance within that. There are no simple answers here. It's not binary. And the Conservative Party is a broad church. People can have their own individual views, but at least under a Boris Johnson premiership, you will know what the policy is, and we will try and go forward.
Well, hang on. But some of your Conservative colleagues have already indicated they'd rather vote against their own government if it pursued in any instances a no-deal Brexit.
There's a leadership election going on, so people are going to have lots of different views.
Yeah, but are you comfortable with the idea that it could precipitate a general election? The same people are going to be sitting in Parliament, like Stella Creasy, who've said they will vote against a no-deal Brexit. People within the Conservative Party have said they'll no confidence.
There is always a chance of a general election, as there should be, because we are accountable to the country. I think there's a massive gap at the moment in this country between Parliament and the country, and between those who vote for us and those of us who actually work up here. And I think nobody wants a general election, but if that is the only way of answering it, we need to pick someone who's going to go and win a general election, and that is clearly Boris Johnson.
But you still need a policy, whether you have a general election or a second referendum, and all political parties are facing.
Are you seriously lecturing me about policies on Brexit?
So you just said it'd be very clear what the policy would be. So what would the policy be? Because you're saying it wouldn't be no deal.
He is clearly.
So what kind of deal would it be?
Clearly, any government would want to leave the European Union with a deal.
Okay, so what kind of deal would it be? How would it be different to what Theresa May's offered?
Any government would like to leave with a deal, OK, but no responsible government would take no deal off the table. We have to get a deal for this country that secures where we are now with the European Union. But take it off the table. I'm afraid any working.
For now, the question of how to confront the past remains.
Moving testimony there from both veterans and victims' families. This is a defining issue for you, isn't it, Johnny Mercer? But what exactly is the problem with investigating people who may have committed crimes?
So that is not the issue here, and as has been identified,
investigations unit to take forward prosecutions brought hasn't diminished.
Of service personnel.
Yeah, absolutely right. This is
with the idea that it could precipitate a general election. The same people issue. Are you still withholding your support for this government over prosecutions of service personnel?
Yeah, absolutely right. This has been an issue I've gone on for the last 4 years. We made serious progress with the Iraq Historical Allegations team. I don't think there is a more profound injustice today in how veterans are treated in this country than this ongoing process of historical prosecutions.
Right, OK, well, let's have a look at this film. The reporter is John Owen, and it looks specific.
And in the police community, I might add.
The wrongdoing of a very, very few as opposed to...
No justification for it.
Allegations team. It is, I don't think there's, as there should be, because we are accountable to the...
Are you sure you know what his position is?
Boris has a position that is very, very clear. No responsible person would take no deal off.
It's a situation that leaves veterans vulnerable.
Government would like to leave with a deal.
We do feel betrayed, yes, absolutely we do.
Would want to leave the European Union with a deal.
Okay, so what kind of deal would it be? How would it be different to what
Any
Theresa May's
government
offered?
would like to leave with a deal, okay, but no responsible government would take no deal off the table.
Still
We
don't
have
understand.
to get a deal for this country that secures where we are now with the European Union. But take it off the table.
All right.
I'm afraid any working man or woman in this country would say you cannot do that in a negotiation.
I think people have had enough of that metaphor on and off the table. But anyway, one more question, because we're going to be showing a film about this issue. Are you still withholding your support for this government over prosecutions of service personnel?
Yeah, absolutely right. This has been an issue I've gone on for the last 4 years. We made serious progress with the Iraq Historical Allegations team. I don't think there is a more profound injustice today in how veterans are treated in this country than this ongoing process of historical prosecutions.
Right, OK, well, let's have a look at this film. The reporter is John Owen, and it looks specifically at the issue of veterans who served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles.
It's a question that still besets Northern Ireland.
We do feel betrayed, yes, absolutely we do.
How to deal justly with the legacy of a decades-long conflict.
The soldier who shot my uncle in the back while he was running away should be prosecuted.
I have a question to the Prime
And in
Minister.
recent weeks, tempers have flared in Westminster about how members of the armed forces should be held to account for their actions.
Why, Prime Minister, are you pandering to Sinn Féin IRA while throwing veterans like me to the wolves?
The anger comes after it emerged that new measures designed to enhance legal protections for service personnel who are alleged to have committed offences abroad won't apply to veterans who served in Northern Ireland. For many, it's a situation that leaves veterans vulnerable to the re-examination of allegations from decades ago, from which they believe they had been cleared.
The conflict in Northern Ireland, better known as the Troubles, claimed the lives of around 3,500 people from the late 60s until the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. And although the violence here has largely come to a close, unanswered questions still remain around the circumstances of many of those deaths.
The vast majority of deaths were caused by paramilitary groups, including the Provisional IRA. But during the course of Operation Banner, the British military was responsible for some 300 lost lives.
And for those who lost loved ones during the Troubles, the desire to see the circumstances of those deaths fully explored and, if necessary, prosecutions brought hasn't diminished with time.
Annette McGavigan was shot in the head, aged just 14 years old, in circumstances that are disputed. She was the first child to lose her life in the Troubles.
It was never investigated. We have no answers. We're looking for answers. Why it happened? She wasn't a rioter. She wasn't an ale bomber. Annette was a child, like 14 years of age. There's no justification for it. I would like to see members of the British Army in court answering to the actions what they've done. Yeah.
6 former soldiers who served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles are currently facing prosecution, with some of the charges relating to killings that took place here in the Bogside area of Derry on Bloody Sunday in 1972.
And my uncle was called Jackie Duddy, and he was 17 years old when he went on a civil rights march, which became Bloody Sunday. And he was running away from the paratroopers along with everyone else when he was shot in the back, and Bishop Daly was running by his side. And so that picture, that footage of my uncle being killed and carried has haunted our family for many, many years. My family feel very strongly that the soldier who shot my uncle in the back while he was running away should be prosecuted, as anyone should be, and that just because he was wearing a uniform he shouldn't be protected. There was a short interview with a military policeman after a death or an injury, and that is what they considered an investigation.
The 2014 Stormont House Agreement promised legislation to establish a new historical investigations unit to take forward investigations into Troubles-related deaths. But for members of the security forces, the prospect of further investigations into the Troubles amounts to a breach of trust.
I joined the military, the Household Cavalry, in August 1968 and served 22 years as a police officer. During that time, my friend and colleague Jonathan Reed was murdered by the IRA, the sniper down there, and I went to the middle of the road to where he was slumped, and he just died. Every day we went out, we were constantly attacked, were constantly hit by petrol bombs, bricks, blast bombs. Almost, it was a constant thing during that time. We all in the veteran community, and in the police community, I might add, are now living in fear that because of a spurious complaint by somebody, you can then get a knock on your door. If you've already been investigated in the past and there was no case to answer, then that should not be brought back again.
Many veterans also see an asymmetry in the system that means that former members of the armed forces are more vulnerable to prosecution than past members of paramilitary organisations.
I could not turn around to anybody who's a victim and say, you've got to draw a line in the sand and move on. But there is anger because there's a very strong feeling that there's an imbalance. Now, every death is a tragedy, there's no doubt, and mistakes did happen. And no doubt there was some wrongdoing. And that should be investigated, and anybody who crossed the criminal threshold should face the full rigour of the law. And how you're going to go about it and getting that level and that balance and that fairness and painting the accurate picture of the overall conflict rather than the focus on the wrongdoing of a very, very few as opposed to those who perpetrated the vast majority of the violence.
West Belfast saw some of the worst turbulence of the Troubles.
My brother Peter was killed along with 2 other men by the British Army. There's a lot of noise coming out of Westminster. It's a lot of misinformation. It's quite odious and insulting to the families here who buried their loved ones. We're now at a stage where that can no longer happen. Right across the community, people want to know the truth about what happened. They want accountability.
For now, the question of how to confront the past remains.
Moving testimony there from both veterans and victims' families. This is a defining issue for you, isn't it, Johnny Mercer? But what exactly is the problem with investigating people who may have committed crimes?
So that is not the issue here, and as has been identified a number of times on that good film there, there's a lot of misinformation around this. So the idea that these people have not been investigated is not true. The idea that serious decisions were made is not true. Some of these decisions were made by the Attorney General of the day. So it's a very simple premise that without new evidence, that prosecution should not be allowed to repeatedly happen to pensioners in their 70s and the 80s simply because they have served. Where individuals have broken the law, of course, they must be held to account. But these people have been investigated and there is no new evidence. And we have to, these people have been told time and again that this is the end of the process for you, that you have been through this process, we've investigated you, you've given your testimony, we've searched all the facts, we've looked at all the evidence, there is no case to answer. Then there's a change in personalities in Northern Ireland. And suddenly the whole process starts again. It is fundamentally wrong and it has to end.
Pascal, what about the principle, though? I mean, Johnny Mercer has said that he accepts that people aren't above